person that did in my mind was Paul Brown. Because until Paul Brown was at Ohio State, the Ohio players, this really wasn't a first choice place for them. They would go to Michigan and Wisconsin and Notre Dame, and they didn't think of Ohio State first. Once Paul Brown got here, they thought Ohio State first. And I think the second thing that's turned around the rivalry and impacted the rivalry a little bit and gave us the point where now, in my mind, we have the upper hand, is that Andy Geiger came in here and said, hey, look, I don't know if you people know how good you can be. And he talked about, we've got to make this stadium the best stadium in the country. And he boldly went out and spent, $217 million to renovate the Horseshoe and turn it into the best stadium in America. And then he wanted to do the same thing with the Woody Hayes Center. He said, if you're going to have the best team in the country, you've got to have the best facilities. Then he built the Jesse Owens track and, all the different things that he did. And he really made everyone believe that you need to think like the best and you need to be bold. And then I think the third thing that really has given us a little bit of the upper hand is that really beginning in about 2002, Michigan no longer could recruit Ohio like they used to. They used to get a lot of their great players, and that door closed. And that door has been closed, and I think that door is going to stay closed. And I don't think Michigan can become the Michigan of old without great Ohio players.
Well, you led the way, really. You did, as of late. You just did. Why was it so important for you to believe that same way, that you can be the best, and that you can beat that team up north? Why was that rivalry so important to you?
Well, growing up, that was about the only game you ever saw. Not like today where you see the teams play on TV every week and see replays of it and, highlights every day. When I was growing up, my dad's season would always end. They didn't have playoffs back then in Division III, and so his season would always end the Saturday before the Saturday of the game. And so it was really the first time we got to see my dad very much because, he'd be home finally on a Saturday. So our tradition was to sit at home and watch the Ohio State-Michigan game. And, and just to see his pride in Ohio State. And, he and Coach Hayes were good friends. And I didn't know back then that his passion was to go to Ohio State. And I didn't learn that till later. It's just like a lot of those folks back in that era, they didn't talk about the war, and they didn't talk about what they wanted or needed. They were always teaching you, and they were always concerned with what you needed. And but I could tell, the Ohio State-Michigan game was a big deal. And then when I was an assistant for Earl had a great grasp on the importance of the game. And my first Ohio State-Michigan game in 1983, I'll never forget, I went out it was at the big house, and I was like a basket case. I've never had a feeling like that. In fact, I don't even remember the first half. I'm sure I did no coaching. I was probably sitting up in the press box with big eyes,
It's taken in by it all.
Just, consumed by it. And so with that combination of my youth and then being an assistant coach for 3 years, and in my 3 years as an assistant, we only won once. And I knew the difference between how it felt when you won and you lost.
Well, you won repeatedly as a head coach at Ohio State. Not only did you beat Michigan so often, you brought that national title back to Columbus, Ohio, which you briefly talked about. But I know Coach Tressel, President Tressel, what that really meant to you. Explain to everybody, because what you did for that city again, to bring that back.
And just to feel the joy. We had gone around all over the country and visited the alumni groups in the spring before that and the spring before the 01 season. So for 2 straight springs, we were all over the country and seeing the people who had great pride in Ohio State and so forth. And I knew how much they loved it. And in the state of Ohio, of course, we knew how much everyone loved the Buckeyes. But to see the joy that it brought after we won that, especially because we were underdogs and,
big
all
underdogs.
That. And so, when you're in the midst of the process, you're not thinking about that. Like, hey, I tell you what, guys, we'll bring him some joy. We were trying to get better every day. But just to see the way that talked to people who said they went outside their home in the middle, January 3rd or whatever, and screamed at the top of their lungs in their neighborhood. And there were other people out there screaming, and just to see that moment happen for people is really neat.
And what a game it was. I mean, you talk about the overtimes, the throwing the late flag, everything. Was that one of the most exciting games you've ever been part of?
It was pretty exciting because, they were a great team, and we had become very good. And everyone knew they were a great team. I'm not sure everyone knew how good we'd gotten. And the gap in between the Michigan game, which was a tough win, and the game with Miami, we even got better. But, I don't know how many people knew that. So to see those two really good teams, there were over 80 of those players from that game that spent some time in the NFL.
That's crazy.
I mean,
That's
it's
a
nuts.
crazy amount of talent.
Yeah. And so the game was so fast
Yes.
because of the talent, and it was physical, and it was a special game.
It's unbelievable to think of how that turned out. And then, that wasn't your only national championship game. You did again for the Buckeyes.
I forget about the other.
Yeah, you probably do. But you were still part of it. And if you ask any coach, would you want the opportunity to give your players that chance to play in a national title game? Who's going to say no? Whether you win or whether you lose, they're on that stage.
Well, there's no doubt. I see kids from both sets of teams, YSU and Ohio State, and in our 25 years, there were 9 of those 25 years where we played for the national championship, which is crazy. And whether we won the games or not, we won 5 and lost 4. The people on those teams are so proud. In fact, the young man I was just talking to recently talked about, I remember when Trent dropped that ball in the end zone, or we would have won that game, we lost by 3 points in the national championship. I said, no, I don't remember. All we do, every time we see him, we remind him, but the joy of having that chance to see if you could be the best one time. It's a blessing that you have a chance to do it. That was and still is, a little bit of a vacuum. You think about all the people that have sacrificed for us to be able to sit here and do this, or our kids to be able to do what they want, or worship where you want, or say what you want, because of the people that sacrificed. And I never did that.